The whole God issue is probably one of the greatest traps that ensnares human consciousness to this day, and varied beliefs in God or gods worldwide have been the source and justification for more bloodshed, torture, and human abuse over the ages than any other reason. Religion is the greatest mind control program ever devised. It is a cognitive prison that has generated more fear, hatred, and division than perhaps any other system ever imposed on mankind. I am going to present a different picture of the God thing in this video, and I ask my listeners and subscribers to listen to what we present by stepping away from the issue just far enough to see what we are trying to point out with this material. Wherever we look on this planet, we find the ideas about God sitting at the fulcrum point in just about every issue that faces humanity. I will start by busting a bubble that most people don't think about. Have you ever considered the fact that without the God idea, that atheists wouldn't have a pulpit to preach from, right? What if the entire God concept simply did not exist? Atheists are anti-God, so without God in the equation, atheism as an anti-belief system couldn't exist. Without their anti-God stance, what do atheists have to talk about? Without God to bitch about, do atheists really have anything else to intellectualize and complain about? So, with just these few questions, we can find one ism, atheism, that can't exist without the idea of God to make their position against. Take away God, and the atheists have no pulpit to preach from. Have you ever considered this fact? So with one ism out of the way, let's see how many other isms disappear in the absence of God. Let's see. Without God to protest against, there would be no Marxism, no Leninism, and no communism, for without the opposition and distaste for God, none of these three isms would have a foundational leg to stand on any more than atheism does. Now let's move a bit in the other direction and see what other isms we can eliminate without the God concept to support ideas. We have all the religious isms: Hinduism, Catholicism, Mormonism, Protestantism, and the list of religious isms just goes on and on. Without the God concept, all of these religious isms would also have to disappear. In the political spectrum, we have conservatism, which generally supports, at least superficially, the religious isms, and then we have liberalism, which in most cases leans to the atheist camp, although the liberals do occasionally play to the religious ismites as well. Without the God concept in this equation, what would be the point of political distinction to separate the two other than human ideologies? If we carry this further and look at the friction of slavery and racism, at least with Christianity in the West, slavery was allegedly justified by God based on racial distinctions. So without God as an excuse and justification, what is the justifiable basis for human slavery outside of the Bible? There is none. Let's look at the gay agenda with the Levitical hatefulness based on God's displeasure in the Bible as well, and we find God smack dab in the middle of this conflict as well. So here we find two other points of human conflict removed if we take God out of the equation. If we can stand back with a genuinely unjaundiced eye, we discover that God is the fulcrum point in all of these areas of dissent, turmoil, and constantly seething hatred and paranoia. What happens if we remove this catalyst for hate and fear called God from the human equation? What happens if we as a species can no longer blame God or the devil for everything in the world? When the concept of God and his holy fucking retribution are removed from the equation, we are left with the truth of the situation, and that is there is no God, and certainly no Satan that is responsible for the actions of humanity, but that it is humans themselves who are ultimately responsible for all of this timeless murder and bloodshed, and the God concept is nothing but a mask that humans doing inhumane things to other humans hide behind. As Endo wrote in his books We Are Not Alone 1 and 2, the human race on this planet was created in a genetic laboratory about 200,000 years ago by an off-world race of tyrants who designed our species as a slave race and others who later set themselves up as our gods. Now, I personally happen to agree with this idea because it simply makes substantially more sense than the supernatural nonsense peddled about God in religions worldwide to this day. Yet, It is this supernatural concept of God that humans use to justify their tyrannical and murderous acts throughout history. It is nothing but a myth used to support humans willing to perpetrate any kind of blood crime imaginable and then refuse to take responsibility for their own vile actions and either justify it as God's will or blame it all on Satan. Nowhere in this equation do you find humans willing to take responsibility for their own vile deeds. With God and Satan in the equation, humans who believe these things can perpetrate horrific crimes and wholesale slaughter, alleviating themselves from being wholly responsible for their actions and making themselves believe that their God says it's okay to do these things. God becomes the scapegoat for human depravity, yet in the final truthful analysis, there is no supernatural God or Satan that exists. It is all a gigantic cognitive hoax, which believers in these things refuse to acknowledge, for if they did acknowledge the myth, then they would have no one to blame for such actions but themselves, and this humanity is not remotely willing to do. It is easier to justify intolerance, hate, murder, raping, and pillaging, and say that one's idea of God justifies such actions, or blame it on Satan if it doesn't turn out the way they wanted. Nowhere do you find humans willing to admit that it is humanity itself that is perpetrating these horrific crimes against each other. God doesn't bless you for every positive thing that happens in your life, and the devil doesn't make you an asshole. You are that all on your own, or not, so own it. If humanity at large was willing to accept what I have just revealed and take responsibility for their own actions without justifying such terrible deeds hiding behind God's coattails, then they would have no excuse for their own murderous bent beyond the mental hacker program called the ego. What would humanity do without God to hide behind? What would humanity think if it had to take full responsibility for its actions instead of having the God scapegoat to hide behind to escape taking responsibility for its own actions as a species? This, I will suggest, ladies and gentlemen, is not a concept that has entered human consciousness except to perhaps a very few individuals over our sordid and bloody history as a species. But this is exactly what I'm asking you to consider with this video presentation. Try to envision a world where the majority of humanity is not plagued by fear of eternal punishment or eternal pie-in-the-sky mystical rewards. Try to envision a world where we can find more in common with each other than the continual opposition that is constantly stirred up at the hands of the consortium and all the religions they have created to keep humanity divided. Can you get your head around such a profound and far-reaching concept? Imagine a world without God being a continual fly in the human ointment, serving as the justification master for every human ill hiding behind his holy fucking robe. Where would all the religious elitists in the world go, and what would they do if they didn't have their God's robes to hide behind? How would all the self-righteous Christians, Muslims, and Hindus function if they didn't have their God to hide behind to make them the arrogant and intolerant assholes they are? Without God, they would simply be arrogant and intolerable assholes with no soap to sell called religion. They would not have the belief that blowing up innocent people has no genuine justification. They would just be considered murderers, not holy fucking martyrs to a mythical God. No crusades without the concept of the Holy Land. No bullshit myths to support the God's chosen people mythology, which would utterly destroy so-called Jewish identity. When we erase the bogus ideas about God from this hateful and bloody equation, no one is special based on the claim to elite passage on the boat to their ideas of heaven. Without God as the fulcrum point, all things become equal and humans are simply humans. We need no idea of God to dictate who we are as a species, and we have no one to blame for our own shitty actions but ourselves. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the world of the second cognition, where no human bends their knees to any concept of subservience as a lesser being to any concept of God or higher power. To exist in the second cognition world, each individual must not only be responsible for their own actions, but accountable for those actions as well. With God in the mix, there is neither responsibility nor accountability, because everything can be blamed on God or Satan. Ladies and gentlemen, when viewed in this truthful light, God is simply an excuse, an agent for responsibility avoidance used by a species for 6,000 years to justify everything it does, whether that is pro-God or anti-God. God is just an excuse and nothing more. Outside being nothing more than an excuse, a comfortable mind-control belief for religious or anti-religious superiority of the ego, what real purpose does the God idea even have? The God concept is nothing more than a tool for slavery that humanity greatly needs to finally outgrow. Many will claim, and it has already been done so in the comment sections of previous videos, that I am an atheist. Well, this is not the case because atheism is nothing but a reactionary belief against God. I'm not an atheist, for I understand where the concept of God originated, and I know why humanity is so plagued with the God mind virus. I am not anti-God as in the belief system of an atheist. If anything, I am anti-illusion, and God is simply one of the most pernicious mind illusions embraced by the Happim to give it comfort and justification, whether it is the pro-God illusion or the anti-God illusion. The consortium controls this illusion everywhere from the composition of alleged holy books of all varieties through churches, synagogues, temples, and mosques, and reaching into our governing political bodies. The God illusion is everywhere, and so long as people embrace the God illusion at all levels, they are slaves to the concept. Not only are they slaves to the illusion, they can justify any actions based on their slavery and blame it all on God's will, thereby utterly avoiding any responsibility for their personal actions. I am not an atheist, a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Satanist, a Buddhist, a Mormon, or anything that could be tagged with petty first cognition labels. Humanity needs to mature past the illusionary dependency on the supernatural God concept and learn personal responsibility as a fully functioning and self-reliant species without having some childish concept of God to hide their bloody actions behind. Without cognitive maturity, personal responsibility, and accountability for each person's individual actions, humanity is wandering around in a maze of cognitive infancy. You can believe in any concept of God one can profess, but one thing that can't be done is no believer can prove God. It is all simply an illusion, and nothing more. How pathetic a statement against a species with so much potential who prefers to give it all up to God rather than accept that they are wholly responsible for what they do, the good as well as the bad. From the Becoming book we read, "Here again, we face the fallacy of what God has been represented to be. The question is addressed to an outside supreme being that holds power over each individual life expression. It is the transfer of the awe held long ago when beings of apparent superior status brought forth the human in partial likeness of themselves for the purpose of exploiting their physical forms in slavery to an all-knowing superior being that promises benevolence but seldom provides it. In other words, this God, with the expected power to control all things, does not now and never has existed. Everything good is not a blessing from Jesus any more than everything bad is to be blamed on the devil. In both cases, whatever happens, it is either humans doing good things or bad things to other humans. God and Jesus, Muhammad and Brahma are all simply mind viruses used to keep priests in business and human consciousness under lock and key. Without the God myth, every priest on the planet would actually have to go out and work for a living or stand in the unemployment lines like everyone else. Now there's a concept that really makes me smile. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Attaining the Second Cognition. I extend my gratitude and my thanks to any and to all who take the time to open their minds, to search for truth, and to push forward in their own cognitive advancement and willful evolution. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. This is Doug Michael, and until next time, walk in peace.